Hi. Short Bus Debate Club. It's a bus rolling. I can get on board. Hello, I'm Darren Jolly. It's time to get this short bus started. So let's roll and on with the show. Everyone, this is Brian Courtney with Short Bus Debate Club. Darren Jolly is sitting here with me.
Hi.
And we have another special guest with third party, which is and I know it's the Constitutional Party, but do you guys actually go by American Constitutional Party or just the Constitutional Party?
Well, each state has its own name, and most of them go strictly with the Constitution Party. But in Colorado, their name is the American Constitution Party. So there are a few variations like that, but generally it's just Constitution Party, and the National Party is just the Constitution Party.
Okay, good. So if anybody wants information on the party, they can just search Constitution Party and find you guys fairly easily, right?
That's it. Constitutionparty.com will get you there.
Okay, good. So that guy that was just speaking, his name is Jim Clymer, and he is the national chairman of the Constitution Party. And now I guess we can just jump into the questions. So, Jim, what would you say is the main idea behind the party's platform?
Well, I would say the main idea is that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among those are life, liberty, and property. Now, I know the Declaration of Independence says pursuit of happiness, and we're okay with that too. But the traditional concept of that phrase was life, liberty, and property, and I guess that's the one sentence answer. To expound on it a little bit would be that we firmly believe that that every political system, every jurisprudence has to have some guiding light, has some pole star in terms of guiding principles. And this country was founded on the principles of the Bible, and our common law was very much tied into the biblical principles, and our nation was founded on those. So that's also stated in the Declaration of Independence by saying that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and everything else in government, in jurisprudence, flows from that concept.
I just always figured they were talking about their moms when they said their Creator.
Well,
so do you guys call yourselves the Constitution Party because of your proximity to Independence Hall and all of that history that's there?
No, I can't say that we do. It just happens to be that I live in Pennsylvania, and when I became, actually, this is my second round of being national chairman. I was national chairman from 2000 to 2012. And when I became chairman back in 2000, I moved the national office to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I live, or the area where I live, and it has stayed there since. Now, then there was an 8-year where somebody else was national chairman, but then they called me back into duty again in 2020, and so I'm serving once again. We have 4-year terms. I should explain that there are 4-year terms. So I served 3 4-year terms first, and then I was out for 2 terms, and came back for my last hurrah, I guess.
So do the members of the party actually vote you in?
The members of the National Committee vote me in. So our structure is that we have, in one sense, we are a coalition of state parties. Every state party has its own bylaws, own set of bylaws, and own set of its own organization and things of that nature. And it elects national committee members to represent the state in the national committee. The national committee is the governing body of the party. And so then it's the national committee that elects the national offices, which include national chairman, national vice chairman, secretary, and treasurer.
Okay. So if you all had like say like a breakthrough candidate, and magically somehow or another you were in a position to where you had an executive that was capable of really affecting policy through executive orders or whatever position. I mean, obviously, it seems like the philosophical bent is that it's however you go through the process of getting it done would be rooted in constitutional, like you keep using the term jurisprudence, like that sort of legal disposition. How would you approach taking care of stuff like Social Security, the environment, education, healthcare, foreign policy, the U.S. economy? What would you deal with first? What's the top of the list? What's the bottom of the list? And how would you go about that? And like, feel free to sort of elaborate on any like concrete policy expressions of those specific sections.
Okay. As our name implies, we are rooted in the Constitution, and we believe that that our federal government has strayed far from the original intent of the Constitution. So, just in the broad sense, it's a matter of getting back to constitutional governance. But now, of the things that you listed there, I would probably say that foreign policy would be our first, the highest priority as far as making change. I would probably say also that the U.S. economy would be maybe a close second, but and probably last in the list that you gave would be the environment, which we. Let me say, first of all, I was an environmentalist before it became cool. I believe in conserving. I believe in taking care of our environment and all that. But as government policy, it's been so badly misconstrued and misapplied, and is used to advance a political agenda, and that's why I would put that one last. As far as foreign policy, which I listed as the first one, I guess some of the major things that we would want to do is, first of all, we want to stop being the policemen of the world. And we have, I forget how many bases around the world where we're there to interfere with whatever we think we ought to be interfering with, and there's just no constitutional basis for acting that way and for being the policeman of the world, involving ourselves in skirmishes around the world where we really have no business being. And of course, the hot one right now is Ukraine. We spending billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in support of Ukraine, which is a corrupt government to begin with, and really has nothing to do with our national interest itself. So we would draw in our military tentacles that are around the world, and where it's where our interests are threatened, and especially our citizens are threatened. Of course, we believe in a strong military, but not to do things like trying to institute democracies, so-called democracies in countries that have no heritage or culture that's consistent with democratic government, which we've done far too much of. It's going to be a matter of getting out of the local conflicts that don't represent any real threat to U.S. security. I would, I would think we would enhance our position in the world, our respect in the world, if we drew in as far as our military presence around the world and stop being the world policeman. I mentioned that a close second would be fixing the U.S. economy, and that involves a lot of things. Of course, that involves, in my view, taxation and getting back on the gold standard, instead of having fiat money, which the government can manipulate for its own political purposes. If we had a dollar, a monetary system that's tied to gold, we could stop playing games with our economy the way the Fed does now. Actually, it'd be a matter of getting rid of the Fed too itself. There's no constitutional basis for a national bank or federal reserve system, as they call it. And also, to accomplish, to heal the U.S. economy would be to significantly scale back the regulations that hinders the economy and get back to trying to develop a free market where people can, where they're not tethered by government regulation. And by that, I mean government regulation where there's really no constitutional basis and no constitutional authority for the federal government to regulate. We believe in the sovereignty of states, and that states have sovereign authority, whereas under the Constitution, the federal government has limited powers, limited authority. And that whole concept sort of got turned on its head. And just a little further explanation of that, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, laid out certain things that that the federal government was supposed to protect, certain rights, and then the 9th and 10th Amendments sort of emphasized the limitations. And basically, this would be the paraphrase, but the 10th Amendment says, we the states have given you, the federal government, certain limited powers. And if we didn't give you any power in a particular area, that means you don't have it. And it's reserved to the states or to the people. And so we believe very strongly in enforcing the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. So I guess that's a brief summary of the things that we would think would be most important in affecting change. If you said magical, I guess in many minds, I guess it would be magical if we won the presidency or won a significant, a majority in the Senate or Congress or something like that. But no, that's what we're working toward.
So in that context, the spirit of it is more like along the line of the anti-federalists. You want to rein back in the federal government on some level. That's one of the things you're
Absolutely.
saying.
Yeah, we want to rein back the federal government on many levels, and there's probably most of the cabinets uh, divisions in the federal government really have no constitutional basis and would be unnecessary. Things that could be handled by the states. I mean, the federal government has the 17 enumerated powers. Article 1, Section 2 gives 17 specific powers that are granted to the federal government. And beyond that, as I said in the 10th Amendment, it basically said, we haven't given you the power, you don't have it. And it's reserved to the states or to the people. And that's what we want to work toward, to scaling that back. Now,
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to ask a quick question about the economy, but go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
well, go ahead and ask your question. I was going to deal with a couple of other issues or areas that you mentioned, but go ahead and ask your question about the economy.
Well, yeah, I just think it's kind of funny, and I'm not saying it's either good or bad, but you're the first third-party interview, I believe, that has mentioned the gold standard, and I agree with you. But with regard to the federal bank or the Federal Reserve, I mean, aren't the first two banks in the United States in Philadelphia? I mean, don't we have to have somebody monitoring what it is we're doing?
But not if we have a gold standard. I mean, that controls it. If we say a dollar is as was understood by the framers of the Constitution to be in that case, it was silver. A dollar was a certain weight of pure silver. And, it doesn't allow itself for manipulation by the federal government or by any
Well,
government.
but it does allow for manipulation, because if you pull certain gold back and don't allow it into the market, or you flood the market with gold, then the price drops. So it can still be manipulated, and I think we need somebody to kind of manage that.
Well, there's a finite supply of gold in the world. And of course, they can keep mining it and so on. They can hoard it. Governments, I guess, could hoard it and do, which I understand China and some other countries are doing right now. But there's still a finite supply, and it's not something that they can just, wave a magic wand and increase, or through debt spending or whatever, make the fiat dollar worthless or worth less. So I guess I would have to acknowledge that yes, it may be manipulated if they do that type of thing, but it severely restricts their ability to play with the economy in that way, like the Federal Reserve does.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. Because, and I don't know if I'm right about that or not, but I swear that the first two banks are in Philadelphia. I know one of the first two are there for sure.
Well, when you say the first two banks, are you talking about a national bank? I mean, you're talking about a bank that's operated by the federal government?
Well, the federal government, as far as the 13 colonies were concerned.
Okay. I mean, certainly there were banks, and I'm not opposed to banks. I think banks play a right function. My objection is to the Federal Reserve system, that the Federal Reserve that has the ability to adjust the value of what they call money.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I mean, I don't think we've actually truly seen capitalism probably since the country has started, and we all insist that we're capitalists. But because of because of the manipulation that you're talking about, I mean, we manipulate farm subsidies and crops with farm subsidies, I should say. We manipulate everything, including international markets. So I don't
But is
know
that yeah?
capitalist.
But that's not constitutional. There's no constitutional basis for the federal government giving farm subsidies and telling farmers what they can plant, what they can't plant, and how much they can plant, and providing crop insurance for bad weather and all kinds of things like that. Uh, that's there's no proper role under the Constitution for the federal government to be involved in those things, and so. Yes, it happens. I agree with it. It happened that they're doing that, but I'm saying that's wrong, and um, that's not a free market economy.
We're gonna both agree with you on that. So what we're past the economy, where were you gonna go to, Jim?
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, like outside of the economy, you were gonna go to a couple of the other
Oh,
things. So
well, I mean, there are some things, and listen, I'm a bit of a realist as well. I'm both a dreamer and a realist, but Social Security is one thing, and again, there's no constitutional basis for or authority that would allow the federal government to have a Social Security system. But some of these things are so entrenched, and I mean, it's not. I'm not going to pretend that we could wave a magic wand and get rid of them. Um, and Social Security is one that's a tough nut to crack because people um, paid into it all their lives and they counting on it, and it's sort of a contractual thing that people have with the government. Wrong in its foundation, but still, it's not something you can just wipe out all of a sudden. Um, there are other things that you could do to ease out of the national welfare system that it represents. And that's really what it is. It's a welfare system because um, it has a concept of paying into a retirement system and then getting back what you paid in. But everybody knows, or anybody who knows anything about it knows that that's not what happens. And the fact is that there's no reserve fund for what people have paid in. It's the the present workforce that's funding for the retirees, and um, so some of these things are very difficult to attack. I would just say while I'm bouncing around some other things that there is no federal role for education. I mean, the education department should be abolished. There's no basis for that in federal government at all. And I'd say the same thing for healthcare um, or the environment. Now you can make an argument for environment because whether it's interstate commerce or whatever, to the extent that's affected, that um, you might be able to make an argument the federal government has some role in regulating that which is among states that a state can't regulate itself sufficiently. But um, generally, it's the states that are sovereign, the ones that have the power, and uh, areas that, like education, that the federal government should just not be involved with at all.
So within the Constitution Party, then, our your main idea is that it really is the Bill of Rights. We don't want to add any of the other amendments on for the philosophical idea to kind of cover some of the other stuff like taxation or social security, education, anything along those lines?
Well, that creates a dilemma for a constitutionalist, no doubt, because to look at it objectively, the amendments as they now exist are part of the Constitution, and of course that was the plan of the framers to begin with, that that where the Constitution needs to be amended as things change and so on, there's a process for doing that. Unfortunately, too many times it's the courts have amended the Constitution by judicial order, and instead of it being amended the proper way. So you look at the individual amendments, and certainly I think the 16th and 17th amendments are exceedingly bad. No, the 13th, 14th grew out of the Civil War and the fallout from that, or some people would say the War of Northern Aggression, but whatever you call it, it's but there's been a lot of mischief that was granted to that, and of course it changed, it shifted power away from the states and purported to give it to the federal government, and by saying that creating a federal citizenship, a U.S. citizenship, whereas before that you only had a citizenship in a state, not as a U.S. You weren't a U.S. citizen. You were a citizen of your particular state, which was bound together with the Constitution to the other states in the Union. And of course, that changed with the 14th Amendment. But the 16th and 17th Amendments, 16th being the income tax, and 17th the way senators are elected. Pretty good arguments that I've heard that they were not properly ratified, and I don't, that's been litigated, and the courts have pretty much said, and again I paraphrase, but pretty much have said that we're not going to really look at it. There's too much history involved at this point. We're not going to go back and unravel something that has been part of our public policy or jurisprudence for 50 or 100 years or whatever. Well, it's over 100 years now for both of them, but so that's probably a losing argument. But if I were to have the ability or the choice, I would repeal both of them, both the 16th and the 17th, and have them not. I don't think they're consistent with the vision of the framers of the Constitution from the beginning. Some of the other ones, the women's right to vote, lowering the voting age to 18 and things like that. So those are, they're policy difference, but I don't have any dispute about those, and they are part of the Constitution. But so we could argue about the merits of the various amendments, but the reality is that they are part of the Constitution, and we have to live within that framework.
And that's kind of what I was trying to figure out, is what framework are we actually working with? I mean, like if I were to say, you know what, I like what those Constitution guys say, I'm gonna vote for them. So that's why I ask, is it just the first 10? Is it all of them? Where do we kind of fit there?
Yeah, we think that
you talked about the process. I mean, that on some level, then time doesn't stop, right? There's a way for time to continue to function socially.
Yes, right. And certainly the first 10, I believe, are the most important. If I'm going to rank them in terms of importance, they're designed to protect um, against the encroachment of government. But again, by court decision, court decree, a lot of those have been turned on their heads. And so, thankfully, I will say that the Supreme Court that we have now is trying to bring us back to proper understanding of the role of federal government in the first set of amendments. But we've gotten a long way from it.
So, I want to move on to the next question just because I'm kind of curious. I know we kind of talked about how you ended up in your position,
Mm-hmm.
but how are the candidates actually chosen for the party? Is that a state thing too, or is it the national committee, or does it depend on what they're running for?
It depends. The only thing that the only direct involvement of the national committee or the national party, you might say, would be for vice president and vice president. Those are nominated by the national convention. We have a national convention every 4 years, just like the Republicans and Democrats do, and libertarians. And our presidential and vice presidential candidates are nominated at the national convention. Every other race is not, the nomination is by the states. So a U.S. senator candidate would be nominated by the state party in that state, or U.S. representative, or any of the local offices or the state party offices that the candidate's running for would be nominated by the states and by their own methods. I think there's just a couple, very few, as a minor party. We almost never get to participate in primaries. That's only a couple states where that's a possibility. So they're almost all the state parties have state conventions where they nominate their candidates, which would be for, like I said, U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, and all the local and state offices.
So with that being said, since you said that each state kind of chooses their candidates through the process, unless we're talking president or vice president, how many states are you guys in as far as, you know, an actual state party?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that with very much precision because it varies. We like to say that we have a presence in all 50 states, but if I were to be candid, which I want to be, that presence is pretty weak in some states. So, as far as actual organized and active parties, well, let me say it this way: in terms of our affiliate, what we call affiliated state parties, is where they have to demonstrate certain things, like they have to have a bank account, they have to have bylaws or organizational documents that where their leaders are elected by democratic means. We don't have dictators. We don't have this, so on. They have to pledge an adherence to the national party platform. So the states that, I think we have 26 states that qualify as affiliated state parties. We have a number of other ones then that are maybe not that well organized. We have, a few people that represent the party in their states, but they haven't demonstrated the criteria that we have for them being affiliated state parties. And again, that changes every year. When we have our convention every 4 years, there's a bit more of a push to get we have, credentials committee that looks at that and re-credentials them, and they have to demonstrate that over again. It's not a once and done thing. And there's a bit of more of a push to have people involved. They get states involved in a presidential campaign. So that number goes up. Typically goes up every 4 years when we have our convention, but then they sort of fall by the wayside, and some of them do, and our numbers are diminished somewhat. So, like I said, right now I think we have 26 states that qualify as state affiliates of the Constitution Party.
Okay. That's actually not bad compared to some of the other third parties we've spoken to.
Yeah. Well, we are recognized by the Federal Election Commission as a national party, and there aren't very many that meet that qualification. The Libertarians, obviously, and the Green Party, and the Constitution Party, and I'm not sure if there are any other ones or not at the moment. But so we are one of the, well, of course, the Democrats and Republicans are, but we're still in a bit of in that class where we are recognized by the Federal Election Commission as a national party.
That's like when we listen to the processes on these things, that can be a really tough road to hoe. So that's a monumental task. I was listening to a guy by the name of Virgil Goody. He's a guy that had a relationship with your party, or has had a relationship with your party. He was a representative guy. But when he identified himself as part of the Constitution Party, that was when I guess he lost the seat in 2008 or 2009 or something like that. Have you had anybody that's like been in, state houses, like federal, like, because he was close. He literally started identifying himself as part of the Constitution Party in 2010. At least that was what I was finding. And, yeah.
Well, he was our presidential nominee in 2012, as a matter of fact, also. And Virgil Good, as he pronounces it, great guy. Yeah, he actually was elected first as a Democrat, and this is from Southern Virginia at that time. A lot of what I'd call classical Democrats, different than the Democrat Party today by a long shot. But he was elected initially as a Democrat, then he switched to independent, and then to Republican. So he was elected a couple of times as Republican then as well, before he lost his seat, as you said. And then we recruited him. I recruited him, and he showed interest in coming with the Constitution Party. He came with the Constitution Party and was our nominee for president. I happened to be the vice presidential nominee with him that year, so I was his running mate. But
he went through quite a process. That was part of the reason why I kind of got stuck going down that rabbit hole for a minute, was because of how much he had changed until he found you all. So
yeah. Now, to answer your other questions, we have a number of people, quite a few number of people who have been elected to local offices, anywhere from township supervisors, school board members, council members, aldermen, as they call them in some states, and things of that nature. We've only had one who was elected as a Constitution Party member to a state legislature. That was a guy by the name of Bill Jor in Montana, where he was actually elected on the Constitution Party ballot. But this shows what can happen there I mean, he illustrated where we can have a lot of influence with few numbers, because the Montana Assembly or legislature, the House of Representatives, was I think there were 50 in total, and there were 25 Republicans and 24 Democrats, and they had I think it was that time. I hope I have this right, but um, they had a Republican governor. Anyway, it was such that he made the difference. He represented the balance of power in the state house. And if he would caucus with the Republicans would have control of the lower house in the Montana legislature. If he caucused with the Democrats, they would have a majority. I actually think it was the other way around. I think the Republicans had 50 and the Democrats had, or 25, and the Democrats had 24. And there's a Republican governor. But anyway, he represented the balance of power. And whichever way he went, he could shift the balance of power in the state legislature. So he had a lot of power, a lot of control, and he could choose what committees he wanted to be on, and could have a lot of influence, and he did. And it didn't last too long, but during that short time, he
What
was.
was the time frame, Jim?
Boy, good question. The early, um, somewhere around 2006, I believe it was. 2006, 2008. It was in the early 2000s.
A nasty 3 years right there. A lot of things happened between 06 and 08.
Yeah, it did. But he was, yeah, it was just that was an interesting. I mean, of course, it's not going to happen that way every time, but that's a case where, by winning one seat, he represented the balance of power in the state legislature.
Timing is everything for sure.
Yes, it is.
So I think for the next question, because of your background, because you served as national chairman from 2000 to 2012, and you're currently doing it, and also because you were the VP candidate with former Representative Good. So does the party have a steering committee, and is there a strict adherence to this party line? I mean, along that Constitution and God and these sorts of things, or?
Yeah, we don't call it a steering committee. We have, I think, conceptually the same thing. As I said before, the National Committee is the governing body of the Constitution Party, but then we have an executive committee. Executive committee consists of the national officers, chairman, vice chairman, secretary, treasurer, and then we also have area chairman and co-chairman. So we have 4 different regions of the country that are governed or overseen by what we call the area chairman and co-chairman. So there's 2 for each of those. They're on the executive committee, and then the chairman gets to choose at-large members of the executive committee. So between national committee meetings, we have 2 national committee meetings a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. And between that time, the executive committee acts on behalf of the national committee. So that's probably the closest thing you would call a steering committee that governs continuously, I guess, between the national committee meetings. But everything that the executive committee does can be overridden by the national committee. So the national committee is really the the controlling committee, but the executive committee has a power to act in between that than to do anything that the national committee could do. So we have like 15 or 16 members of the executive committee, and we meet once a month by telephone and conference call and so on.
But I think what we're trying to understand, and maybe I missed what you said or part of it. Do you guys actually steer the candidates and make them, I don't know, not that they're performing monkeys, but do you make them say certain things and do certain things and, stick to the party line, or is that more of a you can scribble outside the lines thing?
Yeah, I guess it's more the latter. We we like to have strict adherence to our platform, and candidates get grilled pretty strongly on that and their adherence to the platform. But there's some latitude, and so no, there's to answer your question, there's no steering committee in that sense where they would be directing the candidates. And I'll just give you one example: was Virgil Goode when he ran. He was a strong supporter of term limits, and there are some in the party that's not in our platform. That's something that's not. We don't take a position. We don't come out in favor of term limits in our national party platform. So that's something, and there are mixed feelings. Most of the people, I would say, in the party would not support term limits. They believe that that there's already a process for term limits, and that's called voting them out of office. So in that sense, that was one thing that he was promoting, which was not necessarily, it wasn't part of our platform. And nobody called him down on it. There's no steering committee that would say, "Hey, you can't say that." Now, if somebody would come out and say that they support what they like to call a woman's choice on the abortion issue, I mean, one of the pro-life plank is almost sacrosanct in our party and our platform, and there would be a lot of pushback if a candidate would waffle on that. But there's no mechanism in place that says we could knock them out as a candidate if they do something like that. Once they're nominated and once they're running, there's no mechanism that we have to withdraw that nomination.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I know that sometimes you can say, well, we're not going to pay for this commercial, or we're going to boot you off the ticket in this state, or something along those lines. So, and the booting off the ticket in that state, that's just made up on my part. But that's
unfortunately, we don't have enough money to pay for commercials to begin with, so we don't have that stick. It'd be nice if we did, that we could give a lot of money or have a lot of money to support for them, but that's not a stick that we have.
okay.
Unfortunately.
Well, you made a nice segue into the next one, which is how are you guys funded? I mean, you said you didn't have enough money to pay for, TV commercials, but I'm assuming you guys have some money coming in, right?
Well, we have to have money to operate, yes.
Yeah.
And so we have done some direct mail fundraising in the past. We haven't done that lately, but we do email fundraising. as far as just, asking for gifts, contributions, and so on. But our regular operations are funded by, first of all, there's a state assessment for the state affiliates are asked to contribute $1,000 a year as a state assessment. National committee members, we're kind of tough on them because they have to pay a lot of money to come to our national committee meetings, and airfare and hotel and things like that, and registration fees. But then in order for them to vote, to be able to vote in the national committee, they have to pay annual dues of $100. So there's national committee dues. We have program called the Howard Phillips Legacy Society. Now, Howard Phillips was our founder and the guiding intellect of the party when it was founded back in 1992. And he's passed away. He's gone for 10 years now. He passed in 2013. But so we developed the Howard Phillips Legacy Society, where people are asked to contribute a minimum of $10 a month. Now, a lot of people do more than that, but the minimum is like $10,000 a month, and they get certain benefits. They get a newsletter each month that's only for members of the Howard Phillips Legacy Society and so on. So we try to have that be our bread and butter type of funding, and get a number of members to contribute on a regular monthly basis like that. But that's about it. We don't get money from the state or federal governments. And I take that back. There are actually a couple states that have a checkoff system where on their income tax, where they can check off and contribute, have part of their tax money go to the party of their choice. I think there are 2 states where we get a small amount each year from that, but that's not significant in any means. And that's by the action of the people who are filing the tax returns in those states.
So most of your money then is coming from people that are actively involved in the Constitution Party.
I would say most of it, yes. I mean, there are some people, we have some supporters out there who, while they're not active in the party, are very sympathetic toward our positions, our issues, and give us some support by contribution. But most of it is raised from our own people. That's correct.
Okay. So for the 6th one, I found some stuff on Howard Phillips. So like his position sort of grew out of sort of a response to the Bush presidency in a lot of respect. That was something that I seem to be gathering. Would that be fair to say?
I think so. Believe it or not, he was also frustrated with the Reagan administration. He didn't believe that Reagan did what he could have done and what he should have done. But yeah, they're frustrated more by the Bush administration, the first Bush administration. Well, both Bush administrations, for that matter.
Yeah. In the context of your comments on foreign policy, I could see where there might be some problems there. But so like 2023, I knew we're already like knee deep in the primary season for presidential candidates in 2024, and obviously there's a bunch of other elections that'll be coming up. How do you sort of imagine or articulate your short-term, midterm, and long-term goals, and how would you go about achieving them?
Well, I would say our short-term goal is to have an effect on public policy generally, to direct people toward the Constitution, toward our positions, and I gave the example before of Rick Shore in the Montana legislature, the influence he had there, where he was able to affect public policy by being one single vote in the state house. But it happens in other ways too. And I'll give you an example that I was involved with when in this goes back a few years, but 1998, when I ran for lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania, and we were debating what issues we were going to raise, and that we were going to run on, and I said I wanted to run on the issue of abolishing the inheritance tax. We have an inheritance tax in Pennsylvania, and I said we're going to make an issue of that, running to abolish the inheritance tax, and we did. And I was at a public forum or a candidate forum during that campaign, and one of the state senators stood up and said to the whole group that, and I have to give credit to Jim and my one running for governor was Peg Luxick, and he said, I have to give credit to Jim and Peg because they're making an issue of the inheritance tax, and as a result of that, we're now holding hearings on getting rid of the inheritance tax. Well, they didn't get rid of it, but they did lower it, and they created some exemptions that didn't exist. I mean, before that, it was actually even between husband and wife, the inheritance tax applied, and they got rid of that. So, but there's a case where, we got that year a total of like 11%, which was good for a minor party, but not close to winning. But we got 11% of the vote, and so we didn't. We can't say that we won. We can't say we came close to winning, but there was one area because we made a campaign issue of it that the state did lower the inheritance tax rate and created some exemptions that it didn't exist before. So we had an effect on a positive effect on public policy just by having a vibrant campaign where we raised issues. So that's a way to affect public policy, and that would be our short-term goal, to just where it's very realistic to make a difference just by running and raising issues and getting them scared that we're going to take votes away from them if they don't come around. I would say, as far as the midterm goals, would be to dismantle the welfare state and the regulatory state. I mean, I know Romney in 2012, and I'm not a fan of Romney by any means, much to the contrary, but he made the comment that, I forget, something like 47% of people were on the dole to the government one way or the other, and it's actually more than that. But he was vilified in the press for making that statement, but it's a fact. We have a welfare state, and we have even good, what I would call good conservative Republicans, other ones who have their hand in the till, and big corporations, big companies, farmers. I grew up in a farm, and things have changed, but now farmers have their good people, but they still have their hand out. They're dependent on the government, and so that would be a midterm goal, to work toward getting rid of the welfare state and the regulatory state, which if you try to do any real estate development or subdivisions or building projects or anything like that, you realize how hampered we are by regulations in this country today. It's just horrendous. And I give Trump credit for doing a pretty good job of rolling back some of those regulations, but we are still way over-regulated. So that would be, again, a midterm goal of dismantling the welfare state and dismantling the creeping socialism that we have. Uh, Jumping around a little bit there, but included in that would be these public-private partnerships where we have government um, being involved with or partnering with private corporations, private entities to accomplish what they consider public good, but where you have private entities in partnership with government, and of course our tax dollars at stake. But anyway, that would be a midterm goal to dismantling those parts of our public policy now. And then the long-term goal would be just um, the next step on that would be to restore constitutional governance. And again, I'm a realist. That's a long way down the road. There's a lot of things have to change in our society, in our culture, before we get to that point. But that would be the long-term goal, to get us back to constitutional government as envisioned by the framers of the Constitution, and that would represent a drastic overhaul.
So I've just got a quick question about the long-term goal, and I think I interrupted Darren, which isn't unusual. But so you said to get back to constitutional governance again, and I'm not trying to harp on this, but are we talking about, you know what, never mind. I've asked it already, so it's fine. I just, that's okay. We'll move to the next one.
We'll go ahead and
have more to say about the goals at all.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead and challenge me. I mean, I know that it's I don't have a panacea for that. It's definitely a long-term goal, and there's a lot of shuffling, a lot of changes would have to take place before we could get to that. But that means probably eliminating 3/4 of the federal cabinet, and getting the federal government out of housing, urban development, and health and human services, and agriculture, and education, as I mentioned before, and a number of other ones. So,
well, so I guess then my only challenge is because, and this has to do with the party and the Constitution and everything, because if you talk to, I don't know, 4 different academics, they are going to argue about the interpretation of what our forefathers actually meant when they said creator, or when they said man, or when they said whichever word you choose, right?
mm-hmm.
So if all of these interpretations are out there from this doctor and that, then how do you guys pick what constitutional governance actually means?
Well, they've distorted it so much. I mean, um, we're very much a strong believer in originalism that was promoted by Justice Scalia when he was living and on the Supreme Court, and advanced by Attorney General Ed Meese when back in the Reagan. I mean, he was sort of the forefather of that. And that is, I don't think, if you approach it honestly, now there are differences of opinions going, but if you approach it honestly and objectively, it's pretty easy to tell what they meant at the time. I mean, there are ample writings. And they had their disagreements. You had the anti-federalists, as you mentioned before, and there were differences of opinion on policy. But the Federalists won out, and they gave us our Constitution. It is a federal Constitution, And but there's enough of writings that it can be deduced as to what they meant. Um, I don't think there is any doubt. I mean, I know that Obama, when he quotes the Declaration of Independence, he left out the word creator, just as it were endowed with certain unalienable rights. But that's not what it says. It says we're endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights. And that was a recognition that there is a God who created us. And again, I don't think any objective, reasonable person could make a reasonable argument that Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote those words, wasn't referring to God as the creator.
But
And
didn't they use that word with purpose? I mean, because and maybe they left it purposely ambiguous, but I, that's kind of what I'm talking about. And obviously, I'm not an attorney, so maybe my interpretation doesn't make a difference. I am sort of an amateur historian, and I thought that that's why they use the word creator.
Especially when you think about the First Amendment, the lead-in is the Establishment Clause, right? I mean, it's like we can have a conceptual notion of something bigger than us, right? But when they try to create the concrete space between church and state, I mean, there's a degree of ambiguity, but it's open to sort of like be. I mean, and of course, like you said, there's ways that we can interpret it, but it seems like it for me, it's open so that it's inclusive on a lot of levels.
well, yeah, this could get pretty deep, and there may be some difference of interpretation. But I think the most reasonable and logical. I mean, when in Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he refers to the laws of nature and nature's God, and of course, at that time, nouns were capitalized, generally speaking, and of course, it was nature's God with a capital G. And when he wrote creator, that was with a capital C. It was and there were I mean it was not a religious document. There are some people that want to assert that the Declaration of Independence and even the Constitution was a religious document. I don't really take that view. I mean, there's a he makes reference in the Declaration of Independence to divine providence. Well, those are the way they express their belief in God. They refer to him as providence. George Washington, many occasions, referred to God as providence or divine providence. It's just, I mean, especially the Declaration of Independence, there's a number of times where they made reference to God as the one that they owe allegiance to. And I mean, it was finishing up there. It says, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So they clearly, throughout the declaration, there was a recognition of God as being not only the one who endowed us with rights, but the one that we look to for supplication, for guidance, for protection, and so on. Less so in the Constitution, and I know that there's arguments about that to what degree, and I know there are people who believe that the Constitution was divinely inspired. I don't quite put it in that level. I think it's very important, but I don't know that I would raise it to quite to that level. But one notable thing in the Constitution itself, though, is when they dated it. they dated it in the year of our Lord. And that was different, say, from the French Constitution, which was adopted in the same time frame, in the time era, where there was no recognition of being the year of our Lord. So just even in that statement, they the Constitution was recognizing, our Creator, our Creator God. So it's again, I don't. It's not a religious document. But it's a document that was based on biblical principles for government, and had a recognition of God as the underlying foundation of our government.
So I have a question. It's more of a practical question though, like in terms of like the long-term goal in the context of sort of like creating a concrete space of like reasserting the Constitution to where it's more like reflecting the ideal type that you're sort of that the Constitution Party seems to kind of embrace. When I think about the global economy, I think it's probably the most incredible, complex human invention in history. The fact that it even functions without all of us just killing ourselves all the time is pretty incredible. And in 2016, my wife's from Taiwan. We went to China, and I got stuck in this space where I had to talk to this guy that was trained by the party. He had a master's in international business. I dropped out of grad school a couple of times. So since they stuck me in the space, I was going to just pound him for a little while, because if you stick me there, but it was a weird situation. But we talked about Macau, we talked about Hong Kong, we talked about Taiwan. And at the end of the conversation, I said to him, I said, a lot of people in the United States think that at some point in time, we're sort of like coming on a collision course, and we're going to have to go to war with one another because we're the two biggest kids on the block. And because I knew he was trained in the party and he had a lot of education, I just wanted to ask him this question to sort of see what his response would be, And he said to me, when we started to invest in you and you started to invest in us, if we were going to start bombing you or you were going to start bombing us, wouldn't that be like us kind of bombing ourselves? So when I imagine that response, and I imagine this thing that's the global political economy, which we have nation states that sort of like create the backbone that allow it to exist. And like notwithstanding all of the critiques that you offered in relation to like fiat currency, and sort of like a desire to return to a more concrete financial position to the gold standard, where it's not so easy to manipulate to specific people's advantage. How do you begin to decouple such a complex space when we become so integrated? And it's not just with China, obviously. I mean, with NAFTA, with all the WTO stuff and the IMF and the World Bank and the G7, the G20. How do you move into a space where the United States becomes this thing it's going to have a relationship with the rest of the world, and like you had said, in relation to foreign policy, it's not going to be so arrogant and going out on these sort of like venture spaces where we think it's our responsibility to manipulate outcomes so often. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a space where we'd be able to pull back in the United States would exist as this thing, like self-containing unto itself.
Or isolationism, as they might call it.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can be isolationists in our world today. As you said, there is that global economy, it's advanced, but yet down through history, I mean, it's amazing if you study the trade routes of medieval times and early 2,000-3,000 years ago or more. They somehow had global economy. The globe was a lot smaller at that point in terms of population and so on, but they still had trade routes that they had um, they still had international trade that happened, and they didn't have any Federal Reserve setting the value of money and determining interest rates and all that stuff. Somehow it functioned then. Maybe it's a dream world to think that we can go back to something without a lot of government control, but I happen to think it is possible. And the trap that we're in, of course, with China is that we're we're inextricably tied to them in commerce because they're the ones who manufacture virtually all of our drugs. Our pharmaceuticals come from China, as well as component parts for our military and many other things, not just your gadgets that you buy and use around the house or in business, but uh, things that are necessary for our military armaments and so on, the parts that come from China. And um, I don't have a good answer on how we can decouple that, but we've got to have a mentality of America first, and that we've got to protect against the situation where a foreign country, whether it's China or whoever it may be, can bring us to our knees economically because they control so much of our vital resources or vital component parts or drugs and so on. Fortunately, I don't have to take any prescription medication. Uh, I can live without them, but that's not the case with so many people. And um, we we're in a servant position with China because of what we depend on from them. And that's all came about because we had policies that encouraged companies to go overseas and to buy the cheapest thing, and we didn't protect our industry here in the United States. Um, but again, I don't have a magic wand that's going to unwind all of that. But I think that's something that Trump realized, and he took steps to try to undo some of it and give some protection to, or I should say, promoting America first or U.S. first, rather than being totally dependent on China or some other country. I guess I'm saying I don't have a good answer for that or how to do it.
That's a good answer. That's an honest answer. I mean, and
Yeah.
you sprinkled out some spaces where you see some potential openings. I mean, that's where you start, right? I mean, that's where you create
Yep.
possibilities. So
You do what you can, you do what's possible, and work at it.
So, the last standardized question is, as the national chairman, what would you change in our political process to make things better for your party or the parties, voters, and candidates? What would you do to make things better for, those three groups?
Well, first thing I would do is I think we need more choices at the ballot box, and there are more choices should be more choices out there than Republican, Democrat. And to work at that, we've got to have equal access to the ballot. As it is now, we have to spend all the resources that we can muster, all the money that we can muster to get on the ballot in as many states as possible, because we have in some states extremely high hurdles to get over to even get our candidate on the ballot for the fall elections. That's not right. I mean, that's just it's. We've never been. The Constitution Party has never been on the ballot in all 50 states. The highest our high water mark was 45 states. I know the Libertarian Party has done it several times where they've gotten all, but they're better funded than we are. I mean, they still spend a tremendous amount of resources in getting on the ballot. So equal access to the ballot, I guess, would be the one thing that we've been working on, we continue working on to level the playing field so that we at least can have the opportunity of getting our ideas and our candidates out there on the ballot where people have an alternate choice. As far as the election process, I would restore paper ballots. Do away with this mail-in voting, do away with this early voting and everything else, which I think is unconstitutional. I know states have the power to set their own rules for elections, but for the presidential election, I mean, the Constitution says that there's supposed to, come together. There's supposed to be a uniform date. It doesn't say a series of dates over a 2-month period or something that some states have where you can vote. So there should be one day of voting, and there should be paper ballots where people cast their ballot on paper, and to avoid that would avoid a lot of the fraud that exists. And I do believe that there's a lot of fraud in voting, and that can be manipulated when you have electronic voting, when you have mail-in ballots. There's so many things like that. I mean, people who are in the hospital, people who are away on a trip, people in the military and so on, sure, they should be able to vote by mail. But people who just don't want to bother going to a polling place should not be able to vote. They either go to the polling place and cast their ballot on a paper ballot, or they don't vote. I mean, they can do that much. And our history has been that, our heritage has been that vote was something that was a measure of your integrity, and you expected to sacrifice to cast that vote. And it wasn't the idea that it was supposed to be so easy. And when it's going to be made real easy, it opens the door for fraud. And I know in Pennsylvania here, where I am, in the 2020 election, I had a number of people. Now I'm a lawyer, and I have people call me for questions or how to deal with issues that come up. And I had, several calls where people said, their mother or their aunt or some relative was in a nursing home and they maybe had dementia or whatever, and they find out that somebody came in there and got them to fill out a ballot and vote. Well, you can be pretty sure who that was. It wasn't the Republicans, it was the Democrats. And they had, they got people in nursing homes to vote who had no idea what they were doing. But when you have mail-in ballots, that's the type of thing that can be done.
All things being equal, though, like I used to live in a very conservative district, and my wife and my ballots in 2022 were both rejected, and I've had the same signature forever. So if there's something like that happen and it was cutting across both lines, I mean, I think to be fair. So.
Well, maybe
that happened. I mean, it happened. That's all I can say, right? That's my.
You say both your ballots your mail-in ballots were rejected.
Yes.
Because they said your signature didn't match, or
didn't match. That's correct. That's what they said. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that situation.
If it's going to be argued, it's got to be understood that it cuts both ways depending on who it is that's looking at the things itself. Can I just do you have any thoughts on ranked choice voting or approval voting or anything like that? Because it's been out there.
Yeah, ranked choice voting. I don't support that. I think that's just a recipe for mischief, and you end up getting a result that most people don't want. I mean, you look at Alaska, and they got a representative because of ranked choice voting. On the one hand, they got a representative in Congress that most people didn't want. It didn't work the way it was supposed to. And of course, Lisa Murkowski was reelected as a senator uh, as a benefit to benefit from ranked choice voting. Now that's my personal opinions coming out, I guess, but it's and it's confusing. I mean, there are some other methods that uh, the difficulty is going to be in having a system that's simple enough that they can understand it, that people will understand what they're doing. But um, to vote approval or disapproval, you just mentioned that. I mean, that's one I think is a better choice than ranked choice voting if you're doing something different. But you get the same thing if you have multiple candidates on the ballots, and um, you can have people vote their conscience if they have more than two. Now you have like California and I think Oregon or Washington, I forget one of those, but some of them where they have the top two voting and where they weed everybody out in the primary, and only the top two are the ones who are on the ballot in the fall election. I mean, that's not giving choices to people. That's that's wrong in my opinion, my view. Um, I don't oppose. I'm not opposed to different methods like that where people have more choices and where you can make an attempt to have people elected who will be the most um, have the most support or the least opposition, and the approve disapprove method I think would probably come closer to that than the ranked choice voting.
I think I agree with you about the confusing part. Like, I know several people that do not or did not vote for a long time because they either didn't understand the legalese for the amendments and referendums, they didn't know enough about the candidates, they felt confused and overwhelmed. And so I think if you give somebody what essentially is a rubric,
Yeah,
and it just makes things more confusing and voters will be more overwhelmed, and I think we will see fewer people voting. That's my guess. I don't know for sure.
And the ranked choice thing, this is my big concern about ranked choice, right? You might know one person that you like, and you might know one person that you don't like. So then what do? You just go, so if there are 7 people on there, I know who's number one, I know who's number 7. Then I go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it ends up being 2 because 2 was at the top of the list for the people that, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
the approval.
yeah.
I agree with your position on the approval thing. I think it makes a little bit, yeah, because most people are not going to know enough about all of the primary people or whatever to make an intelligent choice about every single one of them, unless you're super dorks like Brian and me, who sit here and go around and try to find people to interview so that we can, put more information out there. So
Well,
I
congratulations
would
for
probably
doing that.
consider myself a
Yeah.
So outside of the standardized questions, I really just have one for you, and that is, it seems like the majority of your positions seem to be almost libertarian, with one main difference, and that is that creator, providence, God portion. Would you say that my assessment is fair, or am I just putting you in a box?
No, I don't think you're putting us in a box. I think it is fair. I think that's generally true. And I explained it this way. The libertarian, and I was a libertarian at one time, but the libertarian position sort of um, its foundation is ideological. Its philosophical foundation is kind of like the will of the people, and putting your trust in mankind, and putting your faith in the intelligence of the people. Um, Whereas the Constitution Party views its foundational beliefs to be that from the Bible and from God. I think you correctly state that there. In terms of policy positions, there are some differences. There are many when it comes to taxation, regulation, foreign affairs, and a lot of those areas. We're very much in sync with the Libertarian Party. When it comes to border control or um, international trade and things like that, they would call free trade, what we call fair trade. There are some differences, and of course, on the social issues, we have some differences. They don't want to. They don't have a position nationally on abortion, and we do. And we believe that the first duty of government is to protect innocent life, and we recognize the unborn child as a person that's entitled to the protection that's supposed to be afforded under the Constitution for all persons. So there are some application differences, but there's a lot of similarities, and especially in economic and foreign policy issues. There's a lot of areas where we're very much in sync. And I also found out that all libertarians don't believe the same. And you have pro-life libertarians, and you have um, libertarians who have a strong faith in God, and so on too. So there's perhaps on the other hand, we have some in the Constitution Party who are Jews. We've had some who proclaim themselves to be atheists and so on, but they still recognize and accepted the principles that the Constitution Party is based on, as strange as that may sound.
No, thank you for clearing that up. I just wanted to make sure that our listeners understood maybe, some of the differences between the two, because there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah, indeed.
Darren, do you have any other questions?
I got what the economy one was the big one for me. So
okay. Jim, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give a statement as to why our listeners should vote Constitution, and then we can wrap this thing up.
Well, I think they should vote Constitution because, and I'll quote Howard Phillips, my mentor, and he said, "Your vote is the currency of your value." And if you believe, if you keep voting for what you disbelieve, you're going to keep getting public policy that you don't agree with. And if encourage people to vote for the Constitution Party, because I believe that the majority of people in the United States believe what the Constitution Party promotes. And if people truly vote their values, we can make a difference, and we can get a change in public policy, and can restore the ideals of the framers of our Constitution.
Very nice. There's so much that I agree with you guys on, and then there's a little bit that I disagree.
As we've been going through the process, we find that out a lot. And it's cool because we've been able to sort of I don't know, we're not in it to try to persuade anybody. We just want to hear what's, and put it out there for other people to to see.
Sure, absolutely. And I appreciate that. So, and I'm not one who asks for total unanimity on issues and policies, but it was interesting. There was a little war story here that I was at a Libertarian Party event, a forum that they put on, a symposium, and they had invited me to come and participate in it. And afterwards, talking with a guy who was there as a libertarian, but he said, I do these some websites out there that ask you what your beliefs are and then tell you which party you're most aligned with. And he said, every time I do that, I come out with the Constitution Party.
So you got a convert just while you were a libertarian.
Absolutely. It's got a convert from the Libertarian Party. That's right.
Well, do you have any questions for us before we end this meeting?
I don't think so. It's kind of late here, and time to get to bed.
Well,
I get up at 4:30 in the morning.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Jim.
It's my pleasure. I thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Cheers.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you, and the same to you. Take
Thanks.
care.